My goal today is really kind of talk about fasting, what exactly happens in our body when we attempt to fast, and then actually figure out, okay, what are the different types of fasts? Does it make sense for me to fast depending on what it is you want to accomplish? And then we'll go from there. I did start. We just started. Alright, fasting. Okay. So what do you think of when you think of fasting?
Hungry.
Hungry? Yeah. Hunger, right?
No food.
No food.
Not
Yeah.
eating, yeah.
Yeah, and so the one distinction I do want to make is that fasting is not starvation. Because I notice, like, when you talk to people and they're like, oh, I'm fasting, they'll be like, oh, I can never starve myself like that. It's like, and the big thing with fasting is it's an absolute choice. So starvation, you don't have access to food for whatever reason, right? And fasting, you're choosing to abstain from eating. You have access to food whenever you want it, but you're making a choice not to. So I like to make that distinction up front because I think there's a misconception about fasting that you're starving yourself. You're not. And so just tell you a little bit about fasting. I mean, fasting's been around for a really long time. So we know, like, from religious practices, Ramadan, you know, in the Bible, it talks about prayer and fasting. So fasting's been something that has been practiced for thousands of years. If you think about, like, hunter-gatherer times, so people would go out, hunt for their food. That food, if they killed a large, you know, animal or whatever, it could last them a good couple of days, but then it could be a couple of days before they might find something else and eat again. So there was just naturally periods of feasting and fasting. And I don't know about, you know, you guys growing up, but I think for the most part, most of us had, like, kind of 3 meals. We didn't snack between meals. When we had dinner, that was it. I know, like, my parents were pretty strict about that. Like, when dinner was done, that was it. You know, if I came home from school and I was hungry, it's like, no, you can't eat because you're gonna ruin your appetite for dinner. And so it was much more structured. And so a lot of us, I think, were fasting. You know, if we eat dinner like by 6, at least 12, 14 hours every day, just naturally. That was just our normal rhythm. But now, you know, we're eating on average about 6 times a day. So we eat our 3 meals a day, then we eat snacks in between. Then after dinner, well, I feel like having something else. And then we're getting ready for bed in the evening. It's like, oh, let me just grab something before I go upstairs. Like, we're just constantly eating food. And so, you know, most people are not fasting anymore. So why do people fast? And I'm gonna there's probably a lot of different reasons, but for the sake of our conversation, from a health standpoint, I would say there's probably 3 main reasons people fast, okay? And so one is for metabolic health and weight loss. And I'll kind of go, most of my discussion today is from a metabolic health and weight loss standpoint. Another reason people fast is something called autophagy. I don't know if you've heard that term before, but autophagy is like spring cleaning in the body. And so your body goes through a process where it breaks down, you know, damaged cells, or if it sees things that are not quite right, like this protein looks a little bit off, it might become something that it shouldn't become. You know, your body sort of takes care of it. So there's a process called autophagy which does that. But autophagy can't happen if our body's constantly digesting. So when you fast for a certain period of time, your body reaches a point where it starts to focus on autophagy and cleaning up inside your body. And another reason people fast is for stem cell growth. So that's a much longer fast. And just for folks that are in cancer, a lot of cancer treatments actually advise that you do some fasting too. Folks that will fast before their chemo treatment actually do much better in their chemo treatments. So those are the main reasons. Again, for our conversation, I'm going to focus mostly on health and weight loss. So in order to really understand whether we should do fasting or what's going on when we're fasting, it's important to realize there's basically 2 states that are going on. We're either fed or we're fasted. And so I'm just going to kind of tell you what's happening in each one. So in a fed state, right, we eat something, our blood glucose goes up. We kind of talked about that like in one of our first sessions. So when you eat something, your body breaks it down. If it has carbohydrates in it, that breaks down into glucose. Your glucose rises. When glucose rises, insulin comes around to bring that glucose down. And what does it do with that extra glucose? Well, if cells need it, your body will use that glucose. If there's extra, your body's going to take that glucose and turn it into fat, or it's going to store it away as something called glycogen, which is kind of like a storage form of glucose. Okay. So the fasted state, basically, it's just the opposite, right? No food's ingested. Because no food's going on, blood glucose lowers. Right? Insulin doesn't really need to be around because there's nothing really to do. And when insulin's not around, because remember what insulin does, insulin likes to store fat. When insulin's not around, well, now there's less glucose around too. The liver says, okay, well, the reason we made all this storage in glycogen and fat was for this time right now, which is there's no food. So now we can go ahead and break down these storage forms and utilize it for energy. So your body, I mean, it's very intuitive, saying, like, of course we don't like what fat's on our body, but the main reason your body creates fat is for that time when there's not going to be food. So the liver begins to break down your glycogen stores, which is again the stored glucose, and cells will use that. And if your glycogen is then empty, the liver can make its own glucose. So if you actually never ate a carbohydrate ever again, your body can still make glucose forever. It doesn't have to have carbohydrates in order to, your body can actually make glucose from other things. It can make it from fat, it can make it from proteins. So that's kind of what happens in a fed state versus a fat state. And again, our bodies were designed to kind of be in both fed and fasted state. What happens now is if we're eating 6 times a day, we really never get a chance to do any of this. Because by the time our body starts to, like when glucose, after we eat, and I'll go through a timeline to show you like how long all this takes. It's like we eat again. So there's never a chance for blood glucose to go down very much. There's not really a chance for insulin to go down, Maybe some glycogen is used up, but not a lot before we fill it up again with the next meal. And so, that's why this isn't really happening. That's why it's so much easier to gain weight now, because we're just eating more than we're actually utilizing. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of a sort of timeline in terms of how long things take. So let's just assume you eat food, okay? This is what we're going to call at 0 hours. So at the beginning, you've eaten something. And let's assume your glycogen's full and you're, it's not that you've been like fasting for days before. So this is point 0. So the next phase is post-absorption phase, and that takes about 6 to 24 hours. So between 0 hours to 6 hours, your body's breaking down food, absorbing it. That's when your glucose goes up and all those things happen. After that's done, they call that the post-absorption phase. During that phase, the glucose and insulin starts to come down. And then if the body needs energy, it's going to start breaking down glycogen. And glycogen is stored in 2 places. It's stored in your liver and stored in your muscles. So that happens anywhere between 6 and 24 hours. And this timeline will vary based on the person and your activity level. So let's just say in the post-absorptive phase, you decide to go to the gym and now you're working out. You might use that glycogen up faster than somebody else who's just sitting at their desk doing nothing, having just eaten 6 hours prior. That make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So does that mean it breaks down faster, so it's not the 6 hour, could be a 4 hour? The post-absorption?
Meaning, yeah, it's possible. If you were, let's say you started doing something, well, digestion takes a certain amount of time regardless of what you're doing.
Okay.
It's more like how quickly your glucose goes down and how quickly you start to break down glycogen. That could depend on your activity level. But digestion itself, for most people, is going to take 6 hours, 4 to 6 hours to just digest our food and absorb it all. Yeah. So what happens next after that is there is a period of time when the body's like, okay, there's no more food here. Glucose is down, insulin is down. We're starting to use up our storage of glucose. We need to keep our blood glucose stable so we don't become hypoglycemic. So we need to actually make some glucose now. And so the body will, for a short period of time, take amino acids, which is basically the breakdown of protein, and start to make glucose. But when that starts to happen, the body's signaled to release something called growth hormone. And so growth hormone starts to increase. And growth hormone's job is to protect our muscle mass, the protein. So when the body notices that it's starting to break down protein to make glucose, it's saying, hey, that's not good because we don't want to break down protein, because protein's really important. So I'm gonna release growth hormone, just kind of stop that process. And what happens next is something called ketosis. So a lot of you have heard of like a ketogenic diet, right? And so that is getting you into a state of ketosis where your body's now burning fat. So that happens after growth hormone increases, the body switches over and says, hey, let's burn fat instead. And what it does is it takes triglycerides. You ever see it in your blood work? One of them is triglycerides. So what triglycerides are is it's basically excess glucose that became fat. And so it takes triglycerides, it can break that down for energy and make glucose. It could take our fat, start to break that down and turn that into energy, and that makes ketones. And so that then becomes like the source of energy. So again, you know, our body can make its own glucose by using triglycerides, using fat, using ketones. Again, there are other energy sources, and your body was made for just this moment, that now there's no food, we need to figure something out, we've got the resources, this is what we're doing. And then because the growth hormone went up, after that your body will kind of conserve your lean muscle mass. Because some people will say, well, fasting breaks down your muscles because of this short period right here, where it breaks down protein. There is that short transition period, but when growth hormone goes up, it then says, hey, stop with the protein, focus on fat now. And then as you fast, growth hormone stays high and it preserves your lean muscle mass. Is that confusing, or is this okay? So I kind of want to show this because, you know, when you talk about intermittent fasting, it's like, okay, well, I'm skipping breakfast or I'm doing this. How does that relate to what's happening in the body? Is any of this even happening, like when I'm fasting and stuff? So I kind of want to give you an idea first of what the process is from eating to your body using fat. Now you may say to yourself, well, my goodness, do I have to not eat for 2 to 3 days before my body will start to use fat? And really, this timeline will vary based on how full your glycogen storage is. Like in your liver, you have a certain amount of glycogen in there. What's your starting point? Is it almost empty? If it's almost empty, then it won't take much before you tap into this section. But if it's always full, then yeah, it is going to take you a while to get to this part, because you're constantly spending the time emptying that before you get a chance to even get into ketosis, right? So let's just say you're a really active person. Well, yeah, you might burn through your glycogen a lot faster, and then you jump into this stage faster too. So all that is going to just depend on who you are. Okay. All right. So how full are my glycogen stores? So like I said before, there's 2 places where glycogen is stored. And again, glycogen is the storage form of glucose. It's in your liver and in your muscles. The liver if your liver glycogen is full, takes about 24 hours for it to completely be empty. If you weren't going to eat and you just ate something, your liver storage is full and you just kind of sat there, it would take 24 hours for that to then become empty. So that's assuming you weren't exercising or doing anything extra. Muscle glycogen is really only used when you actually use your muscles. So let's just say you haven't eaten, your blood glucose is starting to drop, your body's like, oh, we need to make some glucose to keep our blood glucose stable. That all comes from the liver. The muscles don't get involved in that. They kind of keep their glycogen until you need it and you start to move, then it uses that energy to do it. It doesn't get, it's not part of keeping your blood glucose stable. One of the greatest things about building muscle is that because muscle is a storage place for excess glucose, if you weight train, you build and maintain your muscle, you have a lot of place to store glucose. So if you look at hello.
Oh, look, okay. Isn't that nice? I have a seat for you.
Yeah.
So if you look, I don't know if you ever noticed, you'll see social media or something like that, and there'll be somebody who lifts weights, they'll be like, look at what I eat in a day, right? And they'll show you, and it's all these carbs, and you're like, and they're eating all this, they're eating tons of food, tons of carbs, and you're like, how do they do that and still look amazing? And part of it is because they have tons of muscle glycogen storage. So they can eat all this whatever that they're eating, not that junk, but it's just like just even natural carbohydrates. Like they have the storage form and they're constantly using it up. So not only are they building more storage by building more muscle, they're also exercising and constantly emptying it, refilling. So when they eat a meal that's higher carbohydrates, yeah, their blood glucose might go up, but as soon as insulin starts to pull it out, it's like, oh, where are we gonna put it? And it throws it in the muscle because there's plenty of storage there. And that's why it's so important to maintain muscle mass as we age, because most of us, we all lose muscle mass as we age. So we have to intentionally try to stop that loss or even grow. And so that's why it becomes easier and easier for us to get like pre-diabetic and diabetic, because our glucose gets higher and higher because we're not doing the things that help foster this system. Okay.
That's the bad news. That's the bad news.
That's bad, yeah, but there's a solution, right? So that's
out the
good news
now.
That's the good news. Okay. All right, so does this make sense?
Yes.
All right, great. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna kind of go back to these 3 reasons again of why people fast. And so when you looked at that timeline that I had showed before, I stopped it at whatever when you kind of hit ketosis, but depending on how long you go, you can tap into other things, right? And so autophagy, which is kind of like that spring cleaning in your body, like that really is more of like at least a 24-hour type of fasting, like usually water only, not even coffee, tea, just like really clean fasting. Same thing with like the stem cell growth, that's usually several days of water only fasting. So again, those are things that some people like once a year might do like a really long water fast, like a couple day water fast. I think for our purposes for this conversation is I'm going to focus more on like kind of shorter fasting, like day-to-day type stuff. Okay, so in terms of fasting, which fast might be right for me? Well, I'm just going to talk about what each one is. So IF, which is intermittent fasting, also known as time-restricted eating. So basically what that means is you eat in a certain window of time each day. So let's just say, you usually push it to like 10 or 11. So your eating window is like 10 a.m. to like 5, right? Because you say you eat dinner around 5. So that's kind of like your eating window. So you're basically fasting from whenever dinner is done, let's just say 5, to the following day at 10, which would be 17 hours. Okay, so your eating window would be like 17, 7.
7, yes.
Yeah, 17 hours fasting, 7-hour eating window. And so that's kind of what we call, so Al, if you're like not eating breakfast, it's kind of the same thing. So when do you start to eat your first meal usually?
Usually a snack around 11.
Yeah,
10,
so
11.
10, 11, then you finish eating for the day, maybe.
She makes me eat when I get home, so about 6:30.
No
Yeah.
finger
7.
pointing, no finger pointing.
Yeah.
Around 6:30, 7.
Yeah, so 7. So you're going like 11 to 7.
Right.
Yeah. So again, that's kind of your eating window. So that's what they call, most people when they talk about intermittent fasting, that's what they're talking about. Kind of what's your window of eating? You eat in a certain window, then you fast the remaining time. So it's time restricted. OMAD is, I'm not sure if you heard that term before. OMAD is 1 meal a day. So 1 meal a day can be a little bit tricky sometimes because sometimes people will make the 1 meal last for hours. But what 1 meal a day should be is it's not a full 24-hour fast because it takes time to eat, right? And so it's more like a 22, 23-hour fast. And then you eat your 1 meal that day and then you don't eat again till the next. So it's like you might fast dinner to dinner or lunch to lunch, whatever meal you want to eat, you kind of go, that's the 1 meal of the day. So that's another type of fast that is fairly common. Again, it is time restricted eating. It's more like fasting for 22 hours and eating in a 2-hour window. It's just usually just 1 meal. Okay. Then there's another one called alternate day fasting, which is people will eat however they want in whatever frequency or timing on one day, then the next day they don't eat at all. Or they eat very, very restricted, like maybe less than 500 calories. And then they eat again, whatever, and then they do the restricted fast. So they alternate, basically eat one day, don't eat next day, and go back and forth.
Is there benefits to that?
It's, I don't know, when they do the studies, it's not that much different. That it really comes down, I think, to preference. You know, the one thing with fasting is you don't have to think about it. Like, you know, sometimes I find with some of the clients that I work with, they're just like, I'm just so confused. Like, I don't know what to eat. And they're like, I just like fasting because I don't have to think about it. Like, it's easy. And so I think for something like that, for some people, they just gravitate towards that more because for that day, I don't have to worry about anything. I don't have to bring lunch. I don't have to worry about where I'm going to go. You know, it's just simple. So, and then extended fasting is basically anything more than 24 hours. I would call extended fasting. So when people say, well, what kind of fast should I do? I think what you really want to ask yourself is, well, what do I want to accomplish? So to know what you want to accomplish is then to decide what type of fast you want to do. So I'm just going to kind of throw it out there. So what made you decide to fast?
My belly getting big.
Okay. Okay, so it's for a weight loss.
Yes,
you know?
correct.
Do you have a reason why you like fasting or decide to?
For weight loss, I guess, as well.
Yeah. And so I think for most people who do intermittent fasting, it is for weight loss purposes. And I don't think they realize that indirectly what you're doing is trying to improve your glucose,
right?
Improve your insulin, which results in the weight loss, right? And so, you know, if you're saying, okay, you know, that's me, that's something that I want to do, I want to be able to, you know, improve my insulin, improve my glucose, and lose some weight. Well, what do I do? How do I get started? And so what you want to do is ask yourself, well, what is my current eating window? So for those of you who aren't fasting, just think to yourself, like, when am I usually eating? Because we tend to be creatures of habit. Like, when do I generally eat in the morning? And when am I usually done? And then find out what your current eating window is. So let's just say you are somebody who eats breakfast, like you wake up, you know, and then you have something, let's say at 8 a.m., and then, you know, maybe you're having after dinner snack or something like that. Maybe you're not done till like 8 p.m. So you might be like a 12-hour eating window. So what you want to do is say, okay, you want to start gradually. So you start gradually narrowing that eating window. So if right now you're 8 to 8, well, let me say tomorrow, let me see if I can push it to 9 before I eat, and I'll just leave everything else the same. Or if you find it easier because of work and stuff, and like you're trying to get out the door and maybe you have to eat before you leave, maybe I'll just try to see if I can not eat as late. So let me see if I can just maybe cut out that little snack I have right before I end the night. So instead of ending at 8 p.m., maybe I can do like 7:30 or 7. And you practice that for a couple days and see how you feel. And when that feels like, okay, I could do that, then you start narrowing to wherever it is you're ultimately trying to get. I would say for weight loss and really to see improvement in your glucose and insulin sensitivity, you probably have to do at least 14 to 16 hours to have, you know, much of an impact. Because otherwise,
is fasting more beneficial for weight loss or for what goes on in your body during the fasting period?
well, I think both.
Both.
Yeah, you know, and then depending on how long you
Because
fast,
if you
have
eat a
to do more
lot
weight.
during your window of
Right.
time, then
So we'll talk about that.
okay.
Yeah, because that's the other thing too. Sometimes we fast and then we're like, oh, like it's time to just eat like whatever. Like I just didn't eat for 17 hours. Like let me just you know eat whatever I want now. And we should, like we talked about before, there are periods of feasting and famine, right? Just there are periods of fed and fasted, but we don't want to binge, right? So that's the part where we have to be careful. Is sometimes it's easy, especially because when you're ending the fast, like you're starving, and you're like, I'm ready to eat. And so just being mindful of that. And if you find that is you, then you want to ask yourself too, is what am I eating during my eating window that might be causing me to sort of have this, you know, like overwhelming hunger? Because sometimes we eat foods that make us hungrier. So if our blood glucose is like fairly stable through the day, we're not going to have that, oh my goodness, it's time to eat, you know? But if our glucose is not as stable as we'd like it to be, you might have more of those highs and lows, and so then it's like, yeah, I'm getting kind of a little hangry, like struggling. So that's something to keep in mind. So again, you want to avoid those type of foods that raise your glucose during your eating window. So here's just an example I just kind of put together for you. So what would that look like? So let's just say I wanted to do a 16-8 or 18-6. So 16-8 means I fast for 16 hours and I eat in an 8-hour eating window, or maybe I fast for 18 hours and eat in a 6-hour eating window. So for those who might skip breakfast and you're only eating 2 meals, you might be able to eat that in a 6-hour window. If you eat at like, let's say 12 and then eat again at like 5, that's about a 6-hour window. So that would look like basically, most people find breakfast to be the easiest meal to skip. A lot of us aren't that hungry in the morning. We're busy running, getting to work or whatever it is. Breakfast oftentimes is the easier one to skip. Dinner time, we're eating with our families. It's hard to be like, I'm not gonna eat, but I gotta cook for everybody else. It doesn't usually work out. So I find if you want to try to start fasting, breakfast is usually the easy place to start. So let's just say, okay, I got that down pretty good. I'm doing 16-8, that seems to be working well. If you wanted to like take it up another level, this is what it might look like with, let's just say, skipping breakfast and throwing in like a 1 meal a day sometimes. So, on day 1, if you don't see this, on day 1, you skip breakfast, you have lunch and dinner, and then the next day you wouldn't eat again till dinner. So that's your 1 meal a day. And then you go back to doing lunch and dinner, and then again, throw in that. And again, you don't have to do it to this frequency. I was just giving you a sense of what that could look like if you wanted to mix things up. So oftentimes people will say, well, okay, during my fasting time, what can I eat? Or what can I have, I should say. Again, it depends on what your goal is. So like I was saying before, with people who are trying to do autophagy or stem cell, like it's pretty much just water, like that you really can't have anything else. For us who were just trying to improve our blood glucose, maybe lose some weight, we can't have food because it goes against the whole thing, right? So there is no eating, but you could have, coffee, tea. I put a little bit of cream in my coffee. It doesn't
I was
seem to
gonna
make
ask, is that called a fat fast?
No.
Well, see, to me is, again, if it's accomplishing this goal, then it's fine. So if you feel like you can add in a little bit of cream, like for me, when I add a little bit of cream, my blood glucose is still going down. I feel like my insulin is still going down. I do feel like it helps with the weight. But if I was doing it and I felt like, okay, nothing's happening, then maybe the cream is more than my body. It's enough that it's interfering.
I guess you gotta check your sugar. You have to check your level, right?
You can check your glucose, yeah, or you can just see how you feel. Like if you're doing fasting for a little while and noticing like, it doesn't seem to be doing anything, then maybe you want to look at what am I actually having during my fasting time that could be preventing
It's
me
not
from
doing
getting
anything
the full
in terms of
benefits.
making the scale move?
Either the scale move or just feeling changes in your body or just feeling your energy levels, whatever it is. So I do tell folks to avoid, some people will still have sweeteners in their drinks, but they're like, oh, it's one of those 0-calorie ones, or I don't know. I just find the sweeteners in your drinks during fasting foster hunger. Because there are a lot of like things you can put in your coffee or even like electrolyte things that you can add in. Like I had one client, he was using the Propel one, but it had so much sugar in it, which he didn't even realize until he sent it to me. It said sugar free, but it had sucralose, which is another form. It's another form of sugar.
Yeah.
And so
And it
he's
tricks your brain.
Right.
yeah, and so he was just finding that he was just adding more and more of this Propel powder to his water every day, till it was like, and I think it just fosters that sweetness, and you just want more of it. And then when he was time to eat, he was finding himself binging more because it was just like I think it just made our brains want to eat. So just something to keep in mind. Again, everyone's different, but I do find that sweeteners can be problematic during fasting. Alright, so here's some tips. Even whether you're a beginner or not, but the one thing is you always want to be safe. So when you first start fasting, your body may not be used to it. So you may be like, oh, I feel a little like, I'm not used to skipping breakfast. I feel kind of a little bit lightheaded or something. Make sure you drink some water, maybe add a pinch of salt, into it, because when you start fasting and your insulin starts going down, your glucose starts going down, you tend to lose water in your body. Water holds on to electrolytes. And so when you lose water, then you have less sodium, you have less potassium, less magnesium. And so even just taking a pinch of salt, put in your mouth, take a pinch of salt, put in your water, that can help with that lightheadedness. But if you don't feel well, that's the beauty of fasting, you can stop anytime. So if you don't feel good, then you should stop. try it again another time. Okay. Make sure you're staying hydrated during your fasting period. Right? You can drink coffee, tea. I even do broth. Like for sometimes if I do a longer fast, I may just drink some broth just to kind of get through those periods. Ride the waves. That's the hunger waves. So the thing with hunger is if we can get through the wave, you'd be amazed, they go away. So you may feel like, oh man, I'm hungry, like I really want to eat. And like if you could just hang on for like 5-10 minutes, the wave will go. So when we talked about that timeline of your body, right? When hunger comes, it's signaling you to eat. If food doesn't come, your body's gonna say, okay, we need to figure out some other way to get energy. So we're gonna tap into fat, make some glucose, do something else. So at some point your body decides it's gotta switch resources. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that hunger went away. Like you notice when your stomach growls, it doesn't growl for like 24 hours. Like it comes and goes. And so if you can just kind of hang on in that wave, you can get through it, and then you'll be like, oh, I feel fine now. So in the beginning, that's hard. So you gotta kind of ride the waves, stay busy, and kind of distract yourself. Consistency. So some people will say, I don't think this fasting thing's working for me. I'm like, well, how often are you doing it? It's like, oh, I did it, once this week, and then last week I did it once. I'm like, so you gotta give it. It's like saying, I'm going to the gym, but nothing's happening. It's like, well, how often are you going? Well, I'm going like once a week. So, there has to be some consistency if you want to start to see results. Okay. When you are eating, prioritize protein and healthy fats. So try to, we talked about that in the first session with weight losses. You really want to avoid those big highs and lows of your glucose, because that will make fasting that much harder. So if you can eat the right foods in your fasting window, fasting is so much easier than if you're doing this all day long. It's hard. You are gonna be hungrier, and fasting is gonna be harder. Okay, stay busy. So I try to plan my fasting around what I have going on. Like I usually fast Wednesday evenings because I know I'm coming here. I know I'm talking. I know by the time I get home it's late. I'm not gonna want to eat that late, so I tend to just eat lunch, and I'll do like a lunch to lunch fast. So tomorrow I won't, because I usually skip breakfast, so I won't eat till tomorrow lunchtime. So I kind of plan it around what I have going on. I know I'm gonna be busy, and it's an easier time for me not to have to worry about, cooking dinner and all that kind of stuff. Don't tell anyone you're fasting. I just find it's like more people they ask questions, and then they kind of just do it as in the background and without a lot of hoopla around it. Fasting is not an excuse to eat whatever you want. So I think this. So I think this one kind of gets us because when we're done fasting, we are hungry, and it's like, oh, that was good, and I didn't eat for this long, so it's okay if I have this and this. So that can just kind of negate whatever it is you were trying to accomplish in your fasting time. Okay. So like when you're finished a fast, act like it never happened. Go ahead and eat like you would normally eat, and not like, okay, well, I need to eat even more because I didn't eat before. Eat to satiety. Don't restrict yourself, but just, eat to satiety, and don't like overindulge. Fit it into your life. So, there's some people who are just like militant with this, like, okay, I skip breakfast, and this is what I always do. Okay, well, we're having a family gathering, we're all going out to breakfast. It's like, well, I'm not gonna eat. It's like, so just work it out with your life. Like on that day, okay, you eat breakfast. On the other days, you can skip. So just, have it make sense. Because again, I think it's a lifestyle habit to develop, and again, you want to fit it into your life. You don't want it to screw things up. Don't calorie restrict and fast. So this is really important. So you're already not eating for whatever amount of hours. When you're in your eating window, make sure you eat. Like, don't feel like, oh, let me just eat a little bit. Because what we love to do is get on the scale after we fasted, because the scale looks great. It's like, ooh, I didn't eat for this many hours. Like, oh, it looks like scale one. So then when it's time to eat, you're like, maybe I shouldn't eat so much because I just lost a pound or whatever. No, because you don't want to alert your body that food is in scarcity. So it's really important to balance the feast and famine. And so if you're not going to eat for a certain number of windows, you need to make sure you eat. Naturally, fasting calorie restricts because now you're eating in a smaller window. So you can only eat so much in whatever period of time in a 6-hour, 8-hour window. So chances are you're going to eat less than you would if you're eating in a 12, 14-hour window, just because there's more time, there's more opportunity to eat, right? If your window's smaller, there's less time, and you can only eat so much. So you'll naturally calorie restrict and you'll lose weight, but you won't let your body think you're not getting enough food, because when you do eat, you're eating. Does that make sense? Okay. If you are currently fasting, I just put a couple of tips for those who are already doing it. More doesn't always mean better. So if you are fasting, like, okay, well, I like doing 24 hours all the time, so let me just start doing 48 hours all the time. So you need to balance fasting. Overall, again, your body always wants to keep you safe. So if you fast too much, your body's gonna think, okay, we're losing more than we're gaining, and so you want to keep that in mind. Don't always do the same fast. So in the beginning, when you're just learning to fast, it's fine to kind of say, okay, I'm going to try to do 16-8 every single day for the next 2 weeks. I think that's fine. But once you kind of get into a rhythm, don't do 16-8 for the entire year or months on an end. You want to mix things up. Sometimes I do a longer one. Sometimes I do a shorter one. It's important to vary your body, because you want to keep your body guessing. Because once you do a certain thing all the time, your body adapts. And so if it thinks, okay, this is all we're getting every day, it starts to slow. What we don't want to happen is we don't want to slow down our metabolism. And so what you want to do is, keep it guessing. And as long as you keep it guessing, it's not going to adapt to whatever it is you're trying to do. And again, prioritize what you're eating in that eating window. Okay. So just kind of in summary, the benefits of fasting. Again, I think it's an easier way to calorie restrict. So if you think about it, if I'm only eating in a 6-hour window, I don't really have to worry about how much I'm eating, because I know I can only eat so much then. As opposed to saying, okay, well, I need to eat a small meal, so I don't overeat for breakfast, and then a small meal at lunch, so I don't overeat, and then a small meal at dinner time. I just find it easier to just say, well, when I want to eat, I can just eat and not have to think about it so much. So I find it easier. Again, you can still eat to satiety, just in a smaller eating window. Again, it improves insulin sensitivity. Your insulin works better. It helps your blood glucose become more regular and stable. It utilizes that storage form and starts to tap into your fat stores. It gives you mental clarity. So when you get to the place where, let's just say, your glycogen is empty. Let's just say you eat pretty well during the day, mostly proteins, healthy fats. So you're not refilling your glycogen all the time by eating a lot of high carbohydrates. And then maybe you're even a little bit active, so your glycogen is more emptier on a regular basis. You're gonna go into that ketosis phase much faster than someone who doesn't do that. And when your body goes into ketosis, it makes what we call ketones, and our brain loves ketones. Ketones can cross the blood-brain barrier, and so that gives us a lot of mental clarity. So what you might find is when you start to fast more, it's like, oh, I find like I can think a little bit better. My mind's a lot clearer, and that it really is one of the the greatest benefits from fasting. I remember when I did my first longer fast. I remember telling Andrew, like, oh my goodness, I feel like super smart. Like it was just like something happened, and I was like, wow, like everything's just like everything was just unfolding like so easily, and I was like, and I started like, I'm gonna work on this project and this project. It was amazing to me, like just how much clarity there was all of a sudden.
How long was that fast?
That fast, well, I had done I think it was like a 60-hour fast or something
60?
like that.
Wow.
Yeah, but and I think once your body gets used to it, you can get those in shorter periods of time. But this was like earlier on when I first was trying to do things and just like wanted to push it and see how I would feel. But
Are you pro keto diets?
I think I'm pro low carb and removing refined carbohydrates. Whether it's ketogenic or not, I think depends on the person. So I don't think I think ketogenic done the right way has a lot of benefits. I think there's a lot of people just doing it the wrong way out there because it's a fat diet. So I think I think it's gotten a bad name, but there's a lot of therapeutic benefit to a ketogenic diet. Yeah. And again, fasting gives your body a break. Digestion takes a lot of energy from our body. So if you can give your body a break, like let's say we're dealing with maybe some chronic inflammation issues, or we have like, cell damage and other kind of stuff, your body really can't focus on fixing those things if it's always digesting.
Right.
So just ATP is like the energy molecule your body makes, and I mentioned before, like you need all these vitamins to make energy. Well, when we're digesting, it requires a lot of energy. So a lot of that goes towards digesting food. So there's not a lot left over to do other stuff. So when you give your body a break by not eating, you can actually start healing some other stuff.
But you shouldn't do the same fast all the time, right? You shouldn't have that same eating window every day for years.
So I say if you're getting started, you want some consistency so you can get used to it. Once you've been doing it for a while, then you want to kind of mix things up sometimes. And it's free. Like, fasting's free. It's simple. You don't have to figure out what to do. It's just don't eat. And this is just kind of people who shouldn't fast. So anyway, people who have more eating disorders, there's the fasting can trigger some of that. So I try to, anybody who might have some eating disorders, I think you want to stay away from fasting. Again, pregnant, breastfeeding, kids that are still growing, they want to avoid calorie restriction and fasting.